You're being dragged through cobblestone streets. Your bare feet scrape against stone. The rope around your wrists has already drawn blood. You can feel it trickling warm down your palms. Every face in the crowd turns toward you, but no one meets your eyes. They're not looking at you as a person anymore. They're looking at you as a lesson. The guards aren't taking you to the gallows. You almost wish they were. Death by hanging is quicker. Snap, darkness, done. They're taking you to something else. Something you've heard whispered about in kitchens and alleyways. Something that turns your insides to ice even before you see it. And then you do see it. In the center of the plaza, gleaming in morning light, sits what looks almost like a throne. Beautiful metalwork, ornate scrolling, almost regal. But every surfaced seat, the back, the armrest is covered in iron spikes, and beneath it, men are already stoking a fire. Before we go deeper into this darkness, I need to pause and ask, where in the world are you watching this from? It genuinely moves me that a story this old, this buried, can travel across oceans and centuries to reach you right now. Drop your location in the comments. This was the Silla de Hiratha iron chair. And what happened in Spanish town squares during the early 1600s wasn't the work of isolated madmen. It was official policy, sanctioned by the Spanish Inquisition, blessed by priests, carried out in broad daylight while families watched and children were told to remember. The woman being dragged to that chair in 1611 was named Catalina de los Rios. Her crime, helping a young mother deliver twins without summoning a priest first. In the eyes of the Inquisition, that made her a heretic. According to church doctrine, women were meant to suffer during childbirth as punishment for Eve's original sin. Anyone who tried to ease that suffering was interfering with God's divine justice. Catalina wasn't a witch. She wasn't a sorceress. She was a midwife who knew how to position a breech baby and tie off an umbilical cord. But that knowledge, that compassion, was enough to condemn her. The guards forced her onto the chair. The spikes weren't long enough to kill. That's the part most people don't understand. They were precisely measured long enough to puncture skin, to pierce muscle, to hold you immobile, but short enough to avoid major arteries and vital organs. You wouldn't bleed out. You wouldn't go into shock immediately. You would just burn. The executioner controlled the temperature with the precision of a chef adjusting an oven. He started low, let the metal warm gradually, gave Catalina time to feel the heat building beneath her, to understand with dawning horror what was about to happen. The crowd fell silent, not out of respect, out of anticipation. What makes this torture uniquely horrifying isn't just the pain, it's the mathematics of suffering. The Inquisition had spent decades refining this device. Different chairs had different innovations. Some featured hollow spikes where boiling oil could be injected drop by drop directly into the wounds. Others had spikes that could be rotated mid-execution to create fresh agony when nerve endings started to go numb. This wasn't improvised cruelty born of ignorance. This was systematic torture, improved over generations. With modifications passed down from executioner to executioner, like a craftsman's trade secrets, Catalina lasted 6 hours. 6 hours of her skin blistering, blackening, sticking to the heating metal. 6 hours of her trying to arch away from the spikes, only to drive them deeper. 6 hours of a priest standing beside the chair, reading scripture, telling the assembled crowd that this was purification, that the flames were burning sin away, that this agony was an act of divine love. But here's what the priest didn't say, what the official records deliberately omit. Catalina never confessed, not once. Through 6 hours of methodical torture, she never admitted to heresy or witchcraft or any crime. She died without giving them the validation they wanted, and that terrified them more than any confession could have. Because the iron chair was never really about the person strapped to it. It was about everyone watching. Every scream was a sermon. Every hour of suffering was a lesson written in smoke and flesh. This is what happens when you defy us. This is what happens when you speak truth we don't want to hear. The Inquisition didn't need to torture everyone, just enough people, publicly enough, brutally enough, that everyone else learned to stay silent. And it worked. For decades, it worked. But not forever. In the archives of the Cathedral of Seville, there's a document that almost no one knows about. It's not in the main collection, it's misfiled, tucked behind property records from 1650. It's a letter, unsigned, written in careful Latin script. The handwriting analysis dates it to approximately 1628, 17 years after Catalina's execution. The letter reads, "I was in the square that day. I was 8 years old. My father held me on his shoulders so I could see over the crowd. He told me to watch carefully, to remember what happens to women who disobey. I am 42 now. I have not forgotten, neither God nor man, who calls this justice." Some witness who'd been forced to watch as a child carried that memory for 34 years before finally writing it down. They didn't sign their name. They couldn't. Even in 1628, acknowledging doubt about the Inquisition's methods was dangerous. But they needed to leave some record, some evidence that not everyone had been fooled by the propaganda of purification. They needed someone, someday, to know, "We saw what you did. We knew it was wrong. We were just too afraid to stop it." The iron chair claimed dozens of documented victims, possibly hundreds more, whose names were deliberately erased from records. The Inquisition kept meticulous financial documents, but somehow lost the details of who was tortured and why. Graves went unmarked. Families were forbidden from mourning publicly, but one name refused to stay buried: Maria de la Luz Tejada in 1639. In the city of Granada, Maria was the most respected healer in the textile district. She treated burns from the dyeing vats, stitched wounds from loom accidents, delivered babies when the official physicians refused to come to the workers' quarters. She saved lives the church considered too poor, too unimportant to matter. Then a nobleman's wife came to her in secret. The woman had been repeatedly beaten by her husband, broken ribs, internal bleeding, injuries that would kill her if left untreated. Maria treated her, saved her life. And when the husband discovered his wife had sought help without his permission, he did what powerful men have always done when their authority is questioned. He accused the person who helped Maria was arrested on charges of witchcraft and unnatural healing the evidence. She'd successfully treated injuries that a university-trained physician had declared fatal. Therefore, her methods must be demonic. Her sentence was read publicly: purification by the chair of justice, to continue until confession or death. But Maria did something that would haunt the Inquisition for generations after. She refused the gag. Normally, condemned prisoners were gagged before being placed on the chair officially to preserve their dignity, but really to muffle the screams that might disturb the crowd's appetite or make the spectacle less entertaining. But Maria, somehow in a moment of either bureaucratic oversight or divine intervention, was placed on the chair without being gagged first. And when the fire was lit beneath her, when the metal began to heat and her skin began to blister, Maria didn't scream. She sang witnesses, and there were hundreds reported that she sang a lullaby, a simple melody that mothers throughout Granada sang to their children. Even as the flames consumed her, even as her voice cracked and failed, She kept singing that lullaby for 3 hours until her lungs finally gave out. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't celebrate. According to the official Inquisition report, which still exists in the Vatican archives, the crowd stood in unsettling silence. Several families left before the execution finished. A few women were reportedly weeping. The priest who'd presided over Maria's sentencing wrote in his private journal that night, "Her song haunts me still. I cannot unhear it. I pray God forgives us for what we have done in His name." That journal was discovered in 1891 during the cataloging of church documents. After the Spanish Inquisition was formally abolished, the priest's name was Padre Esteban Ruiz. He continued serving the Inquisition for 20 more years after Maria's execution. He never spoke out publicly. He never tried to stop another burning. But he couldn't unhear that song, and neither could Granada. In the weeks following Maria's execution, something shifted. The next scheduled burning was postponed due to insufficient evidence. Then postponed again. The chair sat unused in the plaza for 3 months before being quietly moved into storage. The Inquisition would continue for another 150 years, but the iron chair gradually fell out of favor not because authorities suddenly developed compassion, but because it had become ineffective. The psychological spell was breaking. Fear only works as a control mechanism when people still believe the fear is justified. Maria's song had reminded them the person burning was someone's mother, someone's healer, someone who'd held their children when they were sick. In 1813, when French forces occupied Spain during the Napoleonic Wars, they discovered several iron chairs stored in the cellars of Inquisition buildings. One French officer, Captain Auguste Durand, wrote in his military journal, "We found instruments of torture that would shame the imagination of the cruelest novelists. One chair in particular bore stains and marks, suggesting it had been used recently, within the last decade. We destroyed them all. We melted them down and used the metal for horseshoes. Let their final purpose be to carry men away from such darkness, not toward it." Those horseshoes carried French cavalry across Spain. Some were lost in battles, some were abandoned when horses died. A few eventually made their way back to France, where they were reforged into other objects, nails, tools, gates. Somewhere in Europe right now, there's probably a doorknob or a fence post that used to be part of an iron torture chair. Metal that once conducted the heat that killed Maria de la Los Tejada. Metal that's been transformed, repurposed, redeemed. But here's what we need to understand. The real horror of the iron chair wasn't the metal or the fire. It was the crowd. It was the families who brought their children to watch. The vendors who sold refreshments during executions, the nobles who reserved balcony seats, the priests who blessed the proceedings. The ordinary people who convinced themselves that this systematic torture was somehow protecting them from evil. The chair was just a tool. The real weapon was collective silence, and that weapon hasn't been melted down. We no longer have braziers, heating iron spikes in public squares, but we still have systems that punish people for speaking truth to power. We still have institutions that protect abusers and silence victims. We still have communities where fear of social consequences keeps people from intervening when they witness injustice. The stage looks different now. The tools have changed. But the fundamental question Maria's song posed remains unanswered. When you see someone burning literally or metaphorically, do you sing with them, or do you stay silent to protect yourself? In a small chapel in Granada, there's a memorial that was erected in 1952, more than 3 centuries after Maria's death. It's a simple brass plaque that reads, Maria de la Los Tejada Healer, died 1639. Her song endures. Locals say that on certain quiet evenings, if you stand in the plaza where the chair once stood, you can still hear the faintest echo of a lullaby carried on the wind. Whether that's true or just legend doesn't really matter. What matters is that we remember the song existed, that one woman, in unbearable agony, chose to fill the silence with something beautiful instead of giving them the screams they wanted. The iron chair has been destroyed, but the song survived. And that's how we know fear didn't win.